Slavery by Sam and Daniella. The owner of a slave. The slaves. Slavery is a form of forced labor where a person is compelled to work for another. Slavery traces back to the Bible and the Code of Hammurabi. Day 1. A man can buy a slave during a slave auction. During an auction, people examine the slaves and bet on them. When examining a slave, they checked if the slave was healthy and strong to do lots of work. If the slave was whipped, it showed that the slave was having a hard time being broken, which meant more likely for a slave to run away. When slaves were brought to the owners of the house, they had been taught their new names and brought to the slave house. Usually by teaching a slave, they were beaten until they learned. Slave houses were very crowded with dirt floors. Slave sheds were really uncomfortable. Slave sheds were usually made of straw or old rags. If a slave owner really trusts his or her slave and had a plantation, they would provide a home for them or make the slave build their own home. Day 2. One of the slaves' jobs was to process cotton. They were forced to bring the same amount of cotton each day. If they didn't bring the same amount of cotton, they would have to go back to the fields and pick more. Most slaves had to work from sunrise to sunset. Some owners made their slaves work every day. If they had a nice owner, they would allow their slaves to have Sundays as a rest day. Day 3. Sometimes a slave would run away. If they were lucky, they wouldn't get caught, and if they were beaten or killed. There also was a law that no one could help a runaway slave. The happy day. Some slaves were able to pay for their way for freedom, and some of them learned how to read and write.